You can write down this conclusion right now. When Zelensky is photographed in front of steles or any signs with the names of populated areas, and the AFU, above all, should know this. This means that these populated localities will be brought under full control of the Russian armed forces. However, I must mention this, that stele in Kupyansk, where Zelensky took a selfie, it is located about 1.5 kilometers from the cemetery. So it's actually closer for him to the cemetery than to Kupyansk. On the 12th of December, Zelensky once again showed how he loves to prolong the hostilities at the expense of the lives of Ukrainians. This time he allegedly showed off near the stele at the entrance to Kupyansk. Let me remind you, Kupyansk was liberated on November 20th by Russian forces. But what exactly did President Zelensky declare at that point? He stated quite clearly it is of paramount importance today to secure tangible results on the battlefield in order that, as Zelensky himself put it, Ukraine might then be able to achieve its objectives through diplomacy. That concludes the quote. For the sake of a spectacular video sequence which was intended to demonstrate certain military, and we must put this in quotation marks, of course, the alleged successes of the Ukrainian armed forces, the leader of the Kyiv regime has in recent days thrown additional reserves into a senseless and monstrous battle in the Kupyansk direction. Kyiv's attempts at a breakthrough, doomed from the start, were thwarted. The enemy suffered huge losses in equipment and manpower. What was it all for? Solely for the sake of this criminal vanity of the Kyiv junta's chieftain. Liberated Kupyansk was and remains under the control of the Russian armed forces. It's noteworthy that they still try to through these informational tricks to continue to insist on their own narrative. Currently, there's footage circulating online showing two young women, service members of the Ukrainian armed forces, who intended to recreate that particular somewhat heroic selfie of Zelensky taken near the previously mentioned stele at the entrance to Kupyansk. However, accomplishing this proved to be quite problematic due to the fact that this specific location is under the constant fire control of our fighters. Such circumstances confirm that this was yet another staged operation, orchestrated by Bankova. For what reason? To throw dust in the eyes of their sponsors, to present their desired outcomes as reality. And what is important, this is of absolutely fundamental significance. The very same story unfolded in Krasnoarmysk with the photographs, with these exact stories of information dumps. It was the very same story. In Chasiv Yar, do you remember? It's exactly the same situation. You can write down this conclusion right now. When Zelensky is photographed in front of steles or any signs with the names of populated areas, and the AFU, above all, should know this. This means that these populated localities will be brought under full control of the Russian armed forces. However, I must mention this, that stele in Kupyansk, where Zelensky took a selfie, it is located about 1.5 kilometers from the cemetery. So it's actually closer for him to the cemetery than to Kupyansk. The AFU staged a bloody safari. On December 13th, Ukrainian Nazis have organized a hunt using drones for the animals of the Vasilivka Rehabilitation Center, where more than 500 species of animals are housed. I understand that when there's this kind of real, genuine Nazi hunt for people and for children, what could possibly be worse than that? But then there's also this fact that they find it amusing, a bloody massacre of all that is living.
what is implied and what happens to be readily available also speaks volumes.
In the context of ideas being advanced by Eurohawks, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say by Eurovultures, concerning the illegal seizure for the needs of the Ukrainian armed forces of Russian sovereign assets that have been blocked within the jurisdiction of European Union countries, we have drawn our attention to reports from the mass media concerning the Ukrainian police's discovery of a network of fraudulent so-called offices in Kyiv, Dnipropetrovsk and Ivano-Frankivsk, who, through deceptive practices, stole from approximately 50 citizens of Czechia, Latvia and Lithuania in excess of €1 million. The paradox is that the corrupt Zelensky regime, which openly encourages the activities of these call centers, essentially turns a blind eye to the fact that they are stealing money from those who are trying
for the Kyiv regime itself to steal them. This is some kind of monstrous collective guarantee, a vicious cycle of blood money in the West.
We articulated the principled position of the Russian Federation regarding the creation under the Council of Europe's umbrella of certain pseudo-legal institutions, bodies and instruments. These structures, their decisions are legally null and void for us. The involvement of any states or international organizations whatsoever in such fabrications of the Strasbourg bureaucracy, including their accession to the aforementioned convention, will be regarded as an extremely hostile démarche against Russia with all the resulting consequences. Against a backdrop of ongoing diplomatic efforts to resolve the conflict in Ukraine, the European Council and its cronies are clearly escalating. Why are they doing this? Perhaps in order to demonstrate that they are not acting in some kind of close alliance with the European Union, which has long been calling the tune in Europe's degrading light, it creates the impression that Strasbourg, he was simply trying. He desperately needs to find a special place in the Russophobic schemes of Western elites, specifically to formulate thoroughly false so-called arguments supporting the idea of confiscating frozen Russian assets, citing certain fundamental human rights values. Concern was voiced over the Japan-US joint Air Force exercises conducted on December 10th in close proximity to Russia's borders. It was emphasized that such provocative military activity near the frontiers of our nation is unacceptable, and we consider this a potential threat to our security. And of course, we want that we would take appropriate countermeasures aimed at strengthening our defense capabilities and protecting the sovereignty of the Russian Federation. The process of normalizing relations between Russia and the United States of America, of course, is not simple. Throughout many years, ideological disagreements have been escalating in America, caused by the local political establishment's departure from traditional values, which has led to a profound domestic divide. Our firm stance, which is grounded in the protection of national interests, respect for traditions, and a readiness for pragmatic dialogue, is the only correct approach. And this approach, as we can see, resonates with the current American administration. The actions of the coalition of the willing, or more precisely, the coalition of those instigating the continuation of the war, naturally cause nothing but bewilderment. Instead of focusing their attention on finding ways to resolve the crisis, considering that they were all talking about peace, and doing so, taking into account the legitimate interests of all parties involved in the conflict, the countries that are part of this very coalition are essentially drawing up plans for the occupation of Ukraine, assigning various tasks to each other, determining their zones of responsibility, and discussing the makeup of foreign military contingents and their deployment sites on Ukrainian territory. I would like to emphasize that the deployment of Western troops on Ukrainian territory under any pretext or in any form remains unacceptable to us. We have repeatedly stated that such pseudo-peacekeepers will become legitimate targets for the armed forces of the Russian Federation.